The address in the letter led to a place that shouldn't exist anymore. At least, that's what the map said. But when I arrived there, the building was still standing, waiting. Some places never forget. I didn't open the envelope right away. I left it on the kitchen table, where the morning light landed on everything else. The chipped mug, the folded dish towel, the corner of yesterday's newspaper, but stopped short of the envelope as if the room itself had learned avoidance. The house was quiet in that specific way that makes you feel like you're being overheard by your own memories. Even the refrigerator hum sounded careful, like it didn't want to interrupt. Outside, the rain had softened into something almost polite. Not enough to soak you, just enough to blur the edges of the world. My mother's car pulled away without a goodbye. The tires whispered along the wet street, and then the sound was gone. I waited, still holding my breath, as if she might turn back. She didn't. Her words stayed behind instead. "You're better off not knowing." She hadn't said safe. She hadn't said happy. She hadn't said loved. She'd said better. Better is what people say when they've already done the math, when they've weighed your life against an outcome and decided which loss is acceptable. Better is a choice made by someone who isn't the one who has to live with it. When I finally opened the envelope, I expected a letter, something personal, something human, a confession with trembling edges, an apology with the taste of late regret. There was nothing like that inside. No explanation, no signature, just a single page, typed, clean, impersonal, a place name, not an address, no street, no number, no city, just a name that felt old the moment I read it, like it belonged to a time before people expected to be traced. I recognized it immediately. That recognition unsettled me more than confusion would have. Years ago, during a late-night drive, I'd heard the name on the radio. A caller had been telling a story that never reached its ending. Something about a facility, a fire, a shutdown, a legal battle that died quietly. The host cut him off mid-sentence, laughed awkwardly, changed topics, a commercial break, a new song. Everyone always moved on from unfinished stories. I never did. I packed without thinking. That frightened me later, but not in the moment. I didn't take much. A jacket, a bottle of water, a flashlight that I wasn't sure would still work, my wallet, my keys, and a strange, dull certainty that whatever I was about to find would not feel like a discovery. It would feel like a return. The drive took hours. The highway narrowed, streetlights thinned, houses turned into fields, fields into trees. The world outside the windshield simplified itself as if complexity was a luxury that only populated places could afford. At some point, my phone lost signal. The navigation app froze mid-spin, like it had reached the edge of something it wasn't built to cross. That's when certainty settled into my bones. This wasn't a place people visited. The road ended without ceremony. Trees crowded in close, branches overlapping like fingers trying to conceal a secret. I parked where the gravel stopped pretending to be a road and started pretending to be a warning. The building waded farther in, partially swallowed by vegetation that had grown without permission. Concrete walls, dark stains where rain and time had worked together. Windows boarded but not sealed. Someone had wanted the light out, but not the air. The entrance door hung slightly open. That should have stopped me. Instead, it felt patient, like it had been ajar for years, waiting for the right person to notice. Inside, the air was colder than outside, but not in a way that had anything to do with temperature. It was the cold of abandonment, of something left behind too quickly. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, painted once in a color meant to calm. Now it peeled in long strips, as if the building were shedding skin. I noticed the cameras first, still mounted, still aimed, disconnected maybe, but not removed. Rooms lined both sides. Most were empty, some weren't. Beds bolted to floors, metal frames, straps left stiff with disuse, cabinets labeled with numbers instead of names, a smell of old disinfectant that didn't belong in a place that had been closed for years. This wasn't a hospital, it was something pretending to be one. The records room wasn't hidden. That told me everything. Secrets that are truly gone don't leave signs pointing to where they used to live. The door had been forced open at some point. Files lay scattered, warped by moisture. Ink bled into blue-gray ghosts. I wasn't looking for my name. I knew better than that. I looked for dates. The year I was born appeared again and again, circled, underlined, flagged, a pattern, not an accident. One folder sat apart from the rest, thicker, handled more often. Inside, a single page had survived intact. No name, no photograph, just a designation. Subject cleared for removal. Below it, handwritten, in ink that had bled slightly, but still held its shape like a threat. Ensure continuity. Child must not be traceable. I felt it before I heard it. That subtle shift in the air. The sensation of attention. Breathing. Slow, measured, not startled. Someone else was here, and whoever they were, they hadn't been surprised to find me. I was wondering when you'd come back. The voice came from the far end of the hallway, calm and unhurried, like the question of when had never been in doubt. I turned slowly, flashlight shaking just enough to betray me. He stood where the light thinned into shadow, hands visible, posture relaxed. Older, yes, but not fragile. His eyes had the steady patience of someone who has spent years in a place where time doesn't behave normally. "I've never been here before," I said. He smiled just slightly, like he'd heard that exact sentence spoken in other voices. "That's what continuity feels like," he replied. "You step into it and swear it's your first time, because it was built to feel that way." He didn't ask my name. That was the first thing that truly scared me. Instead, he walked toward me slowly, stopping at a respectful distance, like we were in a church and he didn't want to break a rule. "People call me different things," he said. "Caretaker, archivist, witness, depends on who's talking." "Which one are you?" I asked. "All of them," he said, "and none of them. Titles are for the public. This place doesn't need public titles." The word place sounded wrong in his mouth, like he meant something bigger. I asked what this facility had been. He corrected me gently, what it still is. His eyes flicked toward the cameras above the doors. He didn't look afraid of them. He looked familiar with them, like old acquaintances. "You think it closed," he said. "That's what people needed to believe. Fires are useful. They erase paper. They erase questions. They give officials something to blame besides intent." "So there was a fire," I said. "There was smoke," he replied. "There was a story." He stepped into the records room without asking permission, bending down to pick up the folder I'd opened. His fingers didn't hesitate, as if he knew exactly where it would be. "Continuity," he said, reading the note aloud like it was a prayer, a seamless transfer from one narrative to another. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt too tight for it. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "that a child can disappear from one set of circumstances and reappear in another, without anyone noticing the seam." "A child," I repeated. He glanced at me. Yes, there was something almost careful in the way he spoke, like he was watching for the moment I would break. "Children were brought here under many reasons," he continued. "Medical referrals, private placements, legal disputes, sometimes no paperwork at all." He said it like paperwork was optional. "Why?" I asked. He took a slow breath. "Because this wasn't a hospital. It borrowed medical language, it borrowed sterile rooms, and borrowed authority, but it wasn't designed to heal, it was designed to sort." "Sort what?" I asked, though I felt I already knew. "Risk," he said. "Outcomes, patterns. About behavior like it was weather. About children like they were variables. Stress response mapping," he said. "Attachment projections, environmental override." The phrases sounded clinical, but beneath them I heard something darker. "You weren't given a family," he said. "You were integrated into one." I felt a sharp, angry heat bloom under my ribs. "That's not true." His expression didn't change. It can be true and still feel like a lie. I asked about my adoptive father. The caretaker's eyes softened for the first time. "He wasn't supposed to keep you," he said. "He was supposed to facilitate placement, to be a bridge, not a destination." "And my mother?" I asked. "She was the agreement," he said quietly, "the signature that made it legal enough to look normal." I pictured her hands, the way they shook slightly when she poured coffee. I pictured her face in the rain, The way she said time wasn't on our side. "You're saying they knew," I whispered. "I'm saying," he replied, "they chose the version of the truth they could live with." "Why?" I asked. "Why keep it from me?" He looked down at the folder, then back at me. "Because knowing what you were made for," he said, "is worse than not knowing who made you." The hallway creaked softly, like the building agreed. I asked if there were others like me. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Do they know?" I asked. "Most don't," he said. "Some suspect, some refuse to confirm it, and some," he paused, choosing his words with care, "some were never stable enough for continuity." My stomach turned. He nodded toward the stairs leading downward. "If you want answers," he said, "you'll need to understand what happens when continuity fails." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. His smile returned, thinner now. "Because you came back." "I told you," I said. "I've never been here." He held my gaze. "That's what you were allowed to believe," he said. "But the system remembers differently." He stepped aside, giving me room to choose. "You can leave," he said, "or you can descend." "And if I descend?" I asked. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. "Then you'll stop asking who your father is," he said, "and start asking what you are supposed to become." The stairs sounded older than the building. Each step groaned softly under my weight, like it was trying to warn me, without making enough noise to be overheard. The caretaker walked ahead, flashlight steady, as if he'd made this descent so many times it had become routine. The air grew thicker the farther down we went. Not humid, not stale, just heavy, like it carried more history than it could ventilate. At the bottom, the corridor narrowed. No windows, no natural light. The walls looked cleaner here, less damaged by time. That frightened me. It meant someone still cared enough to maintain this level, even if only to preserve it. The doors were metal. Each one had a small observation slot, a place to look in, a place to be looked at. Names had been scratched into the paint with desperate insistence. Some were shallow, like a child carving timidly. Others were deep, gouged in, as if the person carving believed the wall might remember even if no one else did. Some names were crossed out, some were circled. "Those aren't notes," I said. "They are," the caretaker replied, "just not written by staff." We passed a door where the paint had been scraped away around the handle, the metal polished by repeated gripping. A door that had been held onto too many times. I asked him what happened down here. He answered like he was reciting something practiced. When continuity worked, the child left with a story, a new narrative that fit them like a tailored coat. When continuity failed, he stopped, turning to face me. Then the child became an inconvenience. "Inconvenience," I repeated, tasting the word. He nodded. "It's the nicest word the system ever uses." We entered a room that looked almost empty at first. A bed bolted to the floor, a drain in the center, a cabinet with drawers labeled by number. No posters, no toys, no color, just the cold geometry of control. "This was observation," he said. I imagined a child lying there, staring at the ceiling, learning that boredom can become fear when it's enforced. "How old were they?" I asked. "Sometimes infants," he said. "Sometimes older, it depended on the case." Case. Everything was a case. He led me into a second room, smaller, with a desk bolted to the wall and 2 chairs. One chair was angled slightly toward a corner camera. "Interviews," he said. "Assessments. Provocation tests." I stared at the chair and felt my own skin tighten. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said quietly, "they wanted to see what you did when you felt trapped." The words landed in my chest like a physical weight. He opened a cabinet in the hallway and pulled out a stack of files. Fewer than the ones upstairs. Thicker. More deliberate. These were not the messy leftovers of abandonment. These were curated. He placed them on the desk. Each had a stamped outcome. Adopted, transferred, institutionalized, deceased. "You can't just," I began. He interrupted softly. "They can, and they did." His voice wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was factual, neutral, as if morality was a concept that belonged to other buildings. I flipped through the files, hands shaking. Dates, numbers, codes. Sometimes a short paragraph describing behavior, sometimes a single sentence. Subject displays heightened aggression. Subject exhibits attachment refusal. Subject demonstrates resistance to narrative integration. That last phrase caught in my mind like a hook. Narrative integration, the making of a story that fits. My stomach turned. I reached a file with no stamped outcome, no adoption label, no transfer, just a handwritten note across the top. Subject exhibits resistance. The handwriting stopped my breath. I knew it. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on a note taped to the fridge when I was a kid, on the inside cover of a book he gave me once. My adoptive father. My hands went numb. He was here, I whispered. Yes, the caretaker said. And he wrote this, I said, voice cracking. Yes, why, I asked, though I was already afraid of the answer. The caretaker hesitated for the first time, as if this part didn't fit neatly into his rehearsed explanation. He argued, he said. He didn't just sign, he negotiated. He tried to change terms. Terms, I repeated, sharp with anger. I'm not a contract. He looked at me with something close to regret. In here, he said, everyone is. I stared at the note again. Subject exhibits resistance. Was that me? Was that what they said about me? Had I fought? Had I cried until I learned it didn't matter? Had I refused to bond until someone forced the story to stick? My chest hurt. I wanted to throw the file across the room, to tear it, to erase it, but it wasn't mine to destroy. It had never been mine. What did he do? I asked. The caretaker leaned closer, lowering his voice. He signed the continuity agreement, he said, but he altered execution. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he replied, he took you, and then he erased what he could, burned what he had to, protected what remained. Protected. I clung to that word like a railing. And my mother, I asked. She knew, the caretaker said. She accepted the silence because the alternative was losing you. I heard my mother's voice again. You're better off not knowing. Better meant I stayed. Better meant I grew up believing love was uncomplicated. Better meant they held the secret until it began to rot inside the house. The caretaker gathered the file slowly, as if giving me time to breathe. One more thing, he said. I looked up. You weren't the only one who left this place, he continued. And not everyone who left stayed quiet. The hallway felt suddenly narrower. What do you mean? I asked. His gaze slid toward the cameras above the doors. I mean, he said, you aren't the first to return. Back upstairs. The air felt thinner, but it didn't make breathing easier. It only made everything sharper. The caretaker returned the files to their cabinet with a precision that felt ceremonial. He moved like someone cleaning up after a confession, restoring order so the room could pretend nothing happened. I stood near the doorway, trying to steady my hands, trying to convince my body that I was not trapped, even though the building had taught me what trapped can feel like. You're going to ask about your biological father, he said. I didn't answer, but my silence admitted it. He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You're asking the wrong question, he repeated. Then what's the right one? I asked. He walked past the desk, stopping beneath one of the dead cameras, like he wanted its attention anyway. People think blood is the mystery, he said. It's not. Blood is easy. Blood is traceable. Blood leaves records. The mystery is why you were worth hiding. The words scraped something raw in me. I'm not worth hiding, I said. He smiled faintly. That's what you were taught to believe. It's one of the more humane outcomes. He spoke about donors like they were ingredients. Some were volunteers, he said. Some were coerced. Some never knew their contribution had been taken. The system didn't care about romance or love or family. It cared about data. Traits, he said. Markers. Patterns that repeat. Like what? I asked, though a part of me didn't want examples. He answered anyway. Impulse control, risk tolerance, emotional resilience, the way you respond when you feel threatened, the way you attach or don't. His eyes stayed on me while he spoke, like he wasn't listing traits, he was observing them. You were part of a study, he said, not a medical one, a behavioral one. A study, I repeated. He nodded. Environmental override. He explained it slowly as if he'd learned that people need the words delivered like drops of water, not a flood. The system paired variables. It created circumstances. It relocated children into curated environments, then monitored outcomes, to see what could be changed, to see what could not. It wasn't just about who made you, he said. It was about what you would become if raised in the right story. My stomach turned. So my whole life, I began, was a narrative, he finished gently. Yes, I felt anger rise, sharp and desperate. And my parents just participated. His gaze softened again, and for a second he looked less like a keeper of files and more like a man trapped in the consequences of them. They disrupted it, he said. Your father disrupted it. That's why your file is complicated. How? I asked. He attached, the caretaker said. He saw you as a child, not a subject, not an outcome. Attachment, the same word from downstairs. Attachment breaks systems, he continued. It makes people unpredictable. It makes them do things that don't align with the plan. The plan, I hated that there had been one. What was the plan for me? I asked. He hesitated. Then he spoke as if choosing honesty over comfort. You were meant to be traced later, he said. Not by you, by them. My skin prickled. Why? I asked. Because sometimes, he said, the system doesn't just release subjects into continuity. Sometimes it uses continuity as cover, until it needs them again. I tried to breathe, tried to keep my voice steady. Are you saying I was made for something? He didn't answer directly. Instead he asked, do you ever feel like you're watching yourself from outside your body? Like there's a part of you that stays calm, while the rest of you panics? I hated how quickly an image surfaced in my mind. Times I should have been more afraid than I was. Times I'd reacted too fast, too efficiently. I swallowed. I thought that was just me. He nodded. It is you, and that's what they wanted to measure. I backed toward the doorway, needing distance. Where is my biological father? I asked, stubbornly, like insisting on the question could still make it the center of the story. The caretaker looked at me with something close to pity. You don't want to meet him, he said. You want to meet a version of him that makes you feel normal. Silence thickened. Then he said, if you insist, you can search, but understand this. I waited, barely breathing. You were never meant to find him, he continued, only to continue. Continue what? I whispered. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. A line, he said, a pattern, a theory. I felt my chest tighten. The fire, I said, suddenly remembering the radio story. Did it end this? The caretaker's smile turned colder. The fire didn't end anything, he said. It multiplied it. I stared at him. He nodded toward the hallway, toward the exit. You can walk out, he said. Right now. You can pretend you never saw this. And if I don't, I asked. His eyes flicked toward the cameras again. Then you'll stop being a question, he whispered. You'll become a signal. I left before sunset. Not because I felt safe, but because staying felt like agreeing to be studied. The caretaker didn't stop me. He didn't follow. He didn't even watch me go the way I expected. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like permission, and permission in places like this is never a kindness. Outside, the air was damp and cold. The trees stood too still, as if the wind had learned to behave. My car waited where I'd left it. Ordinary, familiar, like a lifeline. I drove away without turning the radio on. I wanted to hear if the world made any sound when I left. For a while, the only thing I heard was the engine and my own breathing. Then, somewhere between the tree line and the open road, my phone buzzed, signal returning. The screen lit up with missed calls, unknown numbers, a few blank contacts. No voicemail from my mother, no texts, nothing human. One voicemail icon blinked. I didn't press it right away. My fingers hovered. I waited until I reached a wider road, until I could pull over without feeling like the trees would close in behind me. I stopped in a small gravel turnout beside a field. The horizon looked too open, too exposed. I pressed play. Static. At first it was just noise, a hiss like rain on old speakers. Then the noise thinned, and beneath it I heard breathing. Slow, measured, not panicked, as if the person on the other end had taken care to sound calm. Then my name. Not spoken like someone calling you, spoken like someone confirming you. Daniel. The voice didn't sound familiar. Not exactly, but something about it tugged at a place in my mind that had no language. A pause. Then through the distortion a sentence emerged. You were never lost. I felt my hands tighten around the phone until the edges bit into my palm. Another pause, longer this time. You were released. Released. The word turned my stomach. Release implies containment. Release implies ownership. Release implies that someone had the authority to decide when my life began. I replayed the message. Again. Static. Breathing. My name. The two sentences. Each time I listened, the same feeling returned, like a spotlight swinging back toward me, like something had awakened and turned its face in my direction. I checked the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no car, no obvious threat, but the absence didn't feel comforting. It felt deliberate, like I'd been granted a quiet moment before something changed. I swallowed hard and tried to breathe slower, match the calm of the voice. My father's handwriting flashed in my mind. This ends tonight. Had he written that as a promise or as an alarm? I listened again. This time, beneath the static, I heard something I hadn't noticed before. A faint pattern. Not words, not breaths, numbers. They were buried under the noise like a watermark. Soft, but consistent. My brain resisted at first, then accepted. My pulse jumped. I wrote them down on a scrap of paper from the glove compartment, hands shaking just enough that the numbers looked wrong. I listened again to confirm. The same coordinates repeated. Not an accident, not random. A location embedded like a hook. The caretaker's words returned to me. You'll become a signal. I stared at the paper and felt the world tilt slightly. This voicemail hadn't been left by someone stumbling across my number. It had been left by something that knew I'd come back into range, something that could reach out the moment my phone reconnected. The thought made my skin crawl. I looked out across the field. The grass moved gently, as if it didn't know anything about systems. The sky was bruised with sunset, beautiful in a way that felt cruel. I thought about driving straight home, about finding my mother, about demanding every last detail, about forcing the truth out of her until she had nothing left to hold back. But the caretaker had been right about one thing. The system didn't care about confession. It cared about response. If it had left a voicemail, it wasn't because it wanted to talk. It was because it wanted to see what I did next. I put the phone down and sat very still. For a long moment, I did nothing. I wanted to take back the last 24 hours. I wanted to return to being the man who thought his emptiness was just a personal flaw. I wanted to go back to a life where silence meant nothing. But silence meant everything now. I started the car. As the engine turned over, my phone buzzed again. Not a call, a message. Unknown sender. One line. Don't involve anyone. My throat tightened. Another buzz. Second message. It's safer if you move alone. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The caretaker hadn't followed me, but something else had. And the worst part was the certainty settling in my chest. That it hadn't started today. It had always been there, waiting for me to look back. I didn't go home. The decision wasn't heroic. It wasn't even brave. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that arrives before thought, before reason, before denial. If I drove back into my childhood neighborhood, I would bring something with me. The messages had made that clear. Don't involve anyone. Move alone. It wasn't advice. It was instruction. And somewhere inside me, the part that had always felt watched, recognized the tone. I drove until the sky thinned into early night, then into that gray-blue hour before dawn, when everything looks clean and unreal. I stopped at a rest area beside the highway because it was ordinary. Bright lights, vending machines, people half asleep in cars. The kind of place where no one asks questions. I sat with the engine off and listened to the voicemail again. Static, breathing, my name. You were never lost. You were released. Then the coordinates, faint but persistent. I typed them into my phone. The map loaded slowly, like it didn't want to cooperate. Then it dropped a pin. The location wasn't remote forest. It wasn't abandoned. It was near a town, near a road, near something that looked active. The caretaker's words from the facility came back, cold and precise. The fire didn't end anything. it multiplied it. I stared at the map and felt my mind trying to protect itself by making everything smaller, by turning the system into a single building, a single group of people, a past tense event. But the pin on the screen didn't belong to the past. It belonged to now, a place that still existed, a place that could still send messages, a place that could still claim ownership over the word released. My phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. No greeting, just a question. Are you ready to finish what he started? He, my adoptive father, the man who had written "This ends tonight," the man who had burned records and erased names and tried to cut a cord that wasn't supposed to be visible. Finish what he started. My hands went cold. I thought about calling my mother. I imagined her voice, trembling or stern, telling me again that I was better off not knowing. I imagined her crying. I imagined her silence. But the messages weren't wrong about one thing. If I called her, I would confirm something. I would show the system where my fear pulled me. I would give it a map of my attachments. I lowered the phone and looked around the rest area. A couple in an SUV eating snacks. A trucker sleeping with his seat reclined. A teenager walking toward the restroom with headphones in, oblivious. Normal life moving like water around a stone. I wanted to step back into that flow. Instead, I felt like the stone. I checked the mirrors again out of habit. Still no car tailing me. No obvious watcher. That's what made it worse. When something is visible, you can name it. When it stays invisible, you begin to doubt your own senses. You begin to accuse yourself of paranoia. You begin to shrink your own reality to fit what other people would consider reasonable. This system didn't need to chase me with headlights. It could touch my phone. It could touch my life without being seen. I opened the Notes app and wrote down everything. The place name from the envelope, the designation, the handwritten line about continuity, the caretaker's phrases, the coordinates, the messages, the question about finishing what he started. I wasn't sure who I was writing for. Maybe for myself. Maybe for the version of me that would try to deny all of this later. Maybe because somewhere deep inside, I understood that evidence matters, even when you don't know yet how you'll use it. My phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. One line. If you go to the police, we'll make you disappear on paper. I stared at it numb. Disappear on paper. Like the fire story. Like the erased names. Like the file that called me a subject. That was the real terror, wasn't it? Not death. Erasure. A life continuing, but without acknowledgement, without proof, without protection. I imagined walking into a station and telling an officer what I'd seen. The straps, the cameras, the files, the system. I imagined the officer's face, polite, skeptical. I imagined him calling someone up the chain for advice. I imagined the system smiling quietly. I closed my eyes, breathed, slowly, measured, like the voice on the voicemail. That calm part inside me returned, the part that had always seemed to exist alongside my fear. The caretaker had asked if I ever felt like I watched myself from outside. Yes, now I understood why. I looked back at the coordinates. Another location, operational. I didn't have a father's name, but I had a door, and I had the sense, sharp as a blade, that the system had just made its next move. Not by hunting me loudly, by inviting me, by baiting my need for answers and turning it into a path. I started the engine. The sun was beginning to rise, pale and indifferent. As I merged back onto the highway, my phone buzzed one last time. Unknown sender, a final sentence. Once you step in, there's no going back to being a secret. And that was when it hit me. Episode 2 had ended with a warning. Once you start looking, the past starts looking back. Episode 3 wasn't the past looking back. It was the present.